We've talked about the players that you need to be trading for this week, but in this video, we're going to talk about the guys that you should trade away before week 2. And it doesn't mean that these players are bad. It just means that their value right now is extremely high. So if you can, try and upgrade your roster. And the first guy I want to talk about is a veteran 29-year-old running back, Alvin Kamara, who had a strong week 1 in a game that the Saints just absolutely dominated when they faced the Carolina Panthers. And yes, they went out there, and in the first game, a Saints team that we didn't know what they were going to look like, they score 47 points. They win 47-10. He dominates Alvin Kamara, this defensive line of the Saints or of the Panthers. That's not a good defensive line. And to make matters worse, the best player not only on their defense but their entire team, Derek Brown, got hurt in this game, their best run stopper. And because of this great matchup, I like Kamara in week 1. If you had him, obviously you were starting him, and we actually took him for more than 12.5 rush attempts on the Sal Betts Twitter account. And if you come over here, you can see that he cashed that for us. So we already like Kamara a lot. He had 15 rush attempts. Between his rush attempts and his receptions, caught all 5 of his targets, 20 total touches, over 100 total yards, scores the touchdown, has over 20 fantasy points. Obviously a great day, that 110 total yards, but here's the deal. I'm not sure that this is going to be consistent. He's not going to face that Panthers defensive line every single week. It is true, the offense did change under new offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak. They were more creative, they were more deceptive, using pre-snap motion, using play action. So there is a world where a performance like this, maybe not 20 touches a week for the 29-year-old running back, maybe not over 100 total yards per week for the 29-year-old running back, stays consistent, but there is a world where the Saints are actually better than we expected. It's just how much better. Because again, they're not going to face this bottom tier, maybe bottom 5 defensive line in the Carolina Panthers every single week, and you're not going to get 20 touches a week from Alvin Kamara. We know he doesn't have competition right now. You see Jamal Williams is his biggest competition because currently Kendre Miller has a hamstring issue, and he's going to miss at least 3 more weeks as he's on the PUP list, so we'll see what happens once he returns. But I'm skeptical that Kamara's body can hold up for this long, continue to be 20 touch guy. I don't think we're going to see it because, again, he is 29 years old. And if you look at his run the last couple of years, unfortunately, like it happens with all of our favorite running backs, if we scroll back to his 2023 season here on Player Profiler, this is a guy who wasn't efficient last year. He was 45th in yards per carry, 37th amongst all running backs in yards per touch. This was the second straight season that his efficiency dropped, and rarely does the efficiency then go up in your age 29, age 30 season at the running back position. It doesn't mean it can't happen. It happened in week 1, but rarely does it continue the entire season. Now, I wouldn't look too much into the snap shares from this game if that's what you're looking at. If you look at the snap shares on Fantasy Life, you would see that 48% was for Alvin Kamara, and he only saw 41% of the rush attempts. But here's the thing. Kamara didn't play in the 4th quarter of this game, and he actually got pulled midway through the 3rd quarter of this game. Up until that point, he had the full-on command of the backfield. Now, I kept referencing the Panthers matchup because the exact opposite's on the horizon this week for the Saints as they go on the road as 6.5-point underdogs against the Dallas Cowboys, who just led the NFL in pressure rate last year, and their defensive line is arguably, after 1 week, the best in the NFL. This is a concern for the entire Saints offense and Kamara. So when I pull up my rest of season rankings that you can get in the Fantasy Blueprint with 15,000 other people, it'll be linked down below. We'll talk about that more later. You can see Kamara right here is my 52nd overall player. So he's a borderline top 50 rest of season player for me. But if you can, off of this performance right now, go ahead and maybe buy low on somebody like, I don't know, Tank Dell, who I'm going to talk about a lot in this video in terms of a buy low candidate. Go ahead and try and get Tank Dell. Go ahead and try and get DK Metcalf coming off of a shadow matchup against Patrick Surtain. Kenneth Walker, who's currently dealing with an injury, but it doesn't seem like a long-term thing as of this recording. Go ahead and try and somewhat buy low. He had a good game, but buy low compared to Alvin Kamara's performance. That's who I would be trying to go upgrade Kamara for. It doesn't mean Kamara's a bad player. You don't sell him. He's a borderline top 50 player for me, but I think there's some better options you can upgrade to. I feel like I always have to reference that with the upgrade because people say, you think Alvin Kamara stinks. No. This is a whole point. It's a strategy. We're trying to buy and sell here, people. Next up is going to be Michael Pittman, who I'm actually concerned about. Like, I'm not as concerned about Alvin Kamara. I think he could finish as a top 50 player. I think Michael Pittman can too, but I'm more concerned about the way that he fits into this Colts offense. Because first off, if we pull this up, it wasn't a great day for the Colts passing offense, you can say, in terms of overall volume. They only completed 9 passes. I don't think that's going to happen every week, I think, right? 19 pass attempts. I don't think they're only going to pass 19 times a week, but I mean, maybe they're only going to pass 24, 25 times a week with this Anthony Richardson run-first offense, right? Because overall, I have concerns about how Michael Pittman fits into this Richardson new offense. Because we know that Anthony Richardson, there's 2 parts to his game. The first one is the rushing, where he had 56 yards, a touchdown on the ground. He had 6 rush attempts. Obviously, that doesn't help Michael Pittman if Anthony Richardson is going to go and run. But then the second one is the deep passing. The guy only completed 9 passes. He had 212 total passing yards on just 9 completions. His ADOT, average depth of target, was 16.4, by far the highest on the week. So obviously the rushing doesn't help Pittman, but it doesn't help anybody on this team. But the ADOT, the downfield passing from Richardson, definitely doesn't help Pittman, who's more of a underneath type of a player, somebody maybe within the intermediate range of 10 to 15 yards, and that's where Richardson struggled struggled the most with his accuracy. Instead, the guys who are going to benefit most there are the guys who benefited in week 1. Alec Pierce, a couple of deep catches. Adonai Mitchell, who actually had 5 targets in this game, looked really good, was just missed on 2 touchdowns. Even Josh Downs is somebody who can operate out of the slot, but showed last year he can play on the outside and downfield once he returns and is healthy. The odd man out in terms of who's going to create explosive plays in this offense consistently with Anthony Richardson, in my opinion, is Michael Pittman. Pittman is that underneath guy, and Anthony Richardson in week 1 last year and in college struggles to complete the passes between 10 to 15 yards. He's just throwing fastballs out there above their heads for no reason. Now, Pittman did earn a solid 8 targets. He led the team in week 1, so the volume's there, and that's what you're going to expect if you're drafting him as like a 4th round pick, 5th round pick in fantasy to be the number 1 receiver on his team. But he only brings in 4 of those. 50% of his passes and targets this past week were catchable. The other 50% were catchable. Again, that's a quarterback thing. It is only week 1, so we don't want to completely overreact here, but this is something I was worried about coming into the season, and then we saw it in week 1 that he's just really not fitting into this offense and quarterback situation. So right now, if I had to say, I would consider Michael Pittman a top 50-ish overall player as well, and I can pull it up right here in my rest of season rankings. You can see Michael Pittman for me is right below Stefon Diggs as my 46th overall player. But if you can upgrade him to a Zay Flowers who didn't have the greatest week 1, to a Tank Dell who had good usage but not good production in week 1, I would do that immediately. Again, DK Metcalf, these will be some of the similar players we talked about earlier. I would be upgrading him immediately for these guys. And then we have to go and talk about Travis Etienne, because you may have heard it by now, but in case you didn't, there are real concerns coming out about Etienne's role after 1 week. And those concerns, if we pull up right here, Fantasy Life, are this right here, the rush attempts. He had 11 rush attempts to 12 for Tank Bigsby. His backup out-touched him on the ground. Not only out-touched him on the ground, but let's show you how good he played. Bigsby put up 73 yards on his 12 carries. The dude was averaging like 6 yards per touch, whereas Travis Etienne on his 11 carries, just 40 yards, was averaging barely 4 yards per touch. And I know what you might be thinking, oh, Sal, you didn't watch the games. You don't know why Tank Bigsby got more usage. Didn't you see the Travis Etienne fumble? Yeah, as a matter of fact, I did, and you can watch it right here as Travis Etienne fumbles as he's going into the end zone for his 2nd touchdown of the day, and he ends up basically ruining the chances that the Jaguars had to win this game. They end up losing the game. They were up by 10. That would have put them up by 17 going into the 4th quarter. So yeah, I watched the game, but that's not the reason why Tank Bigsby saw more touches. Because the 23-year-old second-year running back out of Auburn, the 210-pound player right here in Tank Bigsby, yeah, no, he was seeing touches on the first drive of the game, and in all 4 quarters of the game, he was being operated as a 1A, 1B with Travis Etienne in terms of carries. And this is exactly what we were told all offseason from Doug Peterson 4 or 5 different times when he was interviewed, all the way back in March till all the way right before the season started. Tank Bigsby's done everything we asked. We want him to have a bigger role. He's looking good. He's going to have a bigger role. And we saw that in week 1, which in my opinion is an extreme concern for Travis Etienne, somebody you took with a 2nd or 3rd round pick in your fantasy draft. And not only that, but he wasn't efficient in week 1. That's a knock against him. He fumbled in a significant way in week 1, and then he lost a lot of snaps. But lucky for you, Travis Etienne put up a moderate day, especially in a week when so many fantasy points were terrible. He puts up 13 fantasy points, as you can see right here, because he finds the end zone, because he's able to put up 2 catches. So you actually have a respectable performance from him at the end of the day if people aren't looking at the underlying usage, which a lot of people in your league probably aren't, and that means you might be able to sell him. Now look, if you pull up Fantasy Life and you see the snap percentages, like your friends, this is what they're going to look at. How many fantasy points and what was his snaps? Oh, he played 68% of the snaps. He's still the RB1. No, look at the rush percentage. He saw less rush attempts than Tank Bigsby. That matters. Now, yes, Travis Etienne is still the lead back in this backfield based off the fact that he saw this 68% of the snaps. You can scroll over a little bit more. He saw 16% of the targets where Tank Bigsby saw no targets. He saw, if you scroll over even more, all the 2-minute drill offense to Travis Etienne to no 2-minute offense for Tank Bigsby, and that's important because it leads to more targets according to Fantasy Life, as you can see right here. So yes, there was still good usage for Travis Etienne, but that's what you're expecting from a guy you spent a 2nd or 3rd round pick on. The other part of the coin here is that he's in a split backfield carries wise, and that's not great. So if you can upgrade Travis Etienne for anybody you're seeing on the screen right now, I would immediately do that. Again, Zay Flowers, Tank Dell come up. Again, if you scroll up a little bit more, you're going to see guys like DJ Moore off a not great performance, Kenneth Walker off a decent performance, but maybe the injury has people a little bit spooked. Brandon Ayuk off of being limited. Heck, maybe you can get Marvin Harrison, who I have graded as my 28th overall player right now. Josh Jacobs, if people are concerned about what's happening in Green Bay, go ahead and try and upgrade. And like I mentioned earlier, if you want access to those rest of season rankings that are updated every single week to help you with trades and just your rest of season stuff, you can check it out, link down below, as well as these other tools, the waiver wire tools on Monday, the projections and rankings that drop every single Thursday and are updated throughout the weekend, and the game-by-game matchup notes that have matchup notes for every single relevant player, cornerback, wide receiver matchups, weight advantages, speed advantages, running back versus defensive line, and all this stuff. If you want want all of that completely risk-free this year and join 15,000 other people, you can get our fantasy blueprint right here on this page. It'll be linked down below through one of our 2 partners. You just follow the 3 simple steps for either partner and you'll have access to it. Now, what does risk-free mean? If you're not familiar, well, it's a one-time payment of $10 when you sign up through one of our partners. That's it. An industry low price. And if you don't make your fantasy playoffs, I refund that $10, meaning you get to use these tools all for free if for some reason you do not make your fantasy playoffs. So if you want to join the 15,000 people using my fantasy blueprint, the tools that I also use, there's a link in the description below, as well as this lovely QR code on the screen right here. How about that? Go ahead and get the blueprint, not now, but right now, because your league mates probably have it, so get it so you can keep up with them. The next man up is going to be Zamir White, and he did not have a good week 1, and I don't care. I still want to sell this guy. Yes, that means you are not selling high on him like you would be doing for an Alvin Kamara, and maybe you would be doing somewhat for a Travis Etienne who scored 13 fantasy points. You'd be selling low on him, and I think that's completely okay, because look at this usage that we saw according to Fantasy Life. 39% of the snaps for Zamir White in week 1, 59% for Alexander Mattison. Okay, now what did this lead to in terms of production? A terrible 5.6 fantasy point day. He loses a fumble in this game. He does get 15 touches, which is encouraging, but just 44 yards on the ground, doesn't find the touchdown. And like we showed you earlier, right here, his snap percentage, just 39%. And why did that happen? Because the Raiders fell behind in this game. They put Mattison out there as the passing down back, so he plays 59% of the snaps. He's running more routes as they're trailing. He runs 60% of the routes, sees 19% of the targets to just 6% for Zamir White. You scroll over even more, you're getting Mattison playing the 2-minute offense, the long down and distance, which are the passing downs, where there's none of that. 0% and just 10% for Zamir White. This is a major concern. We didn't think Zamir White was going to be this elite pass catcher, but we thought he would at least stay on the field in some key situations. And then you get the fact that Alexander Mattison came in here and put up 16 fantasy points, which is going to concern some even more people who have Zamir White. Look, I don't really think I care about the Alexander Mattison 16 fantasy points, because you can see right here, 5 carries for 19 yards, didn't do anything on the ground. 4 catches on 6 targets for 43 yards and a touchdown, but 31 of those yards and a touchdown came on just 1 reception, as you can see right here, downfield, this nice deep reception. Look at this. Look, nice deep reception is sarcasm, by the way, as he has a check down. He does break a nice tackle, and then he walks into the end zone. So he basically breaks 1 tackle on a swing pass, goes into the end zone. I'm not trying to pick up Alexander Mattison or spend a bunch of fab on him, but I am concerned that he's going to be on the field on passing down situations, and that hurts Zamir White a ton. And after the game, which makes it even worse, Antonio Pierce, the Raiders head coach, as you can see right here, he said we're going to roll with the hot hand approach at running back. Now, who knows what this means? It's coach speak. We'll see if it actually happens. But if that's the case in week 1, like we showed you, the snap counts were 13 more snaps for Alexander Mattison because of the way the game script went. And as of right now, it's going from Zamir White is our clear workhorse back. Maybe he'll see 16 to 20 touches a game to now he's in a hot hand backfield. Oof. And if you follow my content this summer, you know that I like Zamir White early in the summer when he was like an 8th round pick. The second he started to become an early 7th and then a 6th round pick, we were out on him. There was just way better running backs, especially in the 7th and 8th round, that you could be targeting, and even the 6th round, like a David Montgomery, that you should have been targeting. And at this point, a split backfield between these 2 guys and an offense that is not that great moving forward, they're going to be trailing a lot. Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of Alexander Mattison on the field, and that's a big concern. And that should continue to happen right away in week 2, where Zamir White looks yet again not great. So if you can try and sell low on him after a 15-touch day and say, oh, his role's still good, look at his 15 touches, it was just 1 bad game, try and sell as low as possible. Well, and not as low as possible, but as quickly as possible, because they're 8.5-point underdogs this week on the road in Baltimore to a team last week that, look, yes, they got beat by the Chiefs, but this is still a Ravens team that is one of the best in the NFL, and I'm concerned that the Raiders are going to fall pretty quickly behind, and that's not great for Zamir White playing from behind, because he's going to come off the field like we just saw in week 1 for Alexander Mattison coming on the field. As you can see in my rest of season rankings, I have Zamir White all the way down as my 117th overall player, meaning if we redrafted right now, he'd be like a 10th round pick for me. So there are so many guys you could trade this for right now. Literally Tyler Lockett I would trade him for. Josh Palmer off a bad game. Bucky Irving, who might be on your waiver wire. Yeah, I'd rather have Bucky Irving at this point. Tajay Spears I'd rather have. Austin Eckler, which just sounds gross. All of these dudes. Check the rest of season rankings right now down below. Go ahead and trade Zamir White even for a Jaylen Warren, who was hurt in week 1. Jonathan Brooks, who will return in 3 weeks. Jaleel McLaughlin, who had really good usage. All of these other running backs or wide receivers I'd much rather have than one Zamir White. I'm sorry, that's what happens after 1 week. Some guys just look like crap, and the role for Zamir White is crap. The next man I want to talk about is a very similar situation to Michael Pittman, and it's Terry McLaurin, who I'm not going to say you should trade right now. I mean, if you can, great, but I'm going to say hold on to him and trade him after this week. More on that in a second, but I'm highly concerned for the way that McLaurin is fitting into this offense with his new quarterback, a mobile quarterback in Jaden Daniels. Because in week 1, Terry McLaurin was primarily an outside receiver on the left side of the field, and he was just running go routes. He wasn't put in motion. He wasn't used over the middle of the field much, and that's a boring role that doesn't lead to a lot of upside. And the man who put him in that role was his new offensive coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, who did the exact same thing to DeAndre Hopkins during their time together in Arizona, where Hopkins wasn't happy with that, where his production didn't reflect an elite wide receiver because he wasn't used in creative ways. Put your best players in motion, put them in the slot, use them over the middle of the field. I'm sorry, I'm getting so animated. For a guy who actually doesn't even have that many Terry McLaurin shares, it's just annoying to see a guy not used, a great player like that, in good ways. Now, we know the usage for McLaurin was great. He led the team with 30 routes. He led the team with 4 targets. He had the highest target share on the team, but that's the problem. His highest target share was just 4 targets because this team wasn't throwing the ball. And only 2 of his 4 targets were catchable. The other 2 were completely inaccurate, nowhere near being caught. Daniels only threw 24 times in this game, compared to running 16 times. This is a Mickey Mouse fake offense. This is not going to continue. There's no way this continues in the NFL. But here's the thing. On his 24 attempts, his average depth of target was just 5.5 yards, dead last in the NFL. We talked earlier about Anthony Richardson throwing the ball downfield. Jaden Daniels is throwing the ball on average like behind the sticks right now. And when he did throw downfield, just 2 times in week 1 of 20 plus yards, he completed 0 of them. Not a good start. I mean, it was as gimmicky as an offense could be in week 1, and I thought we would see a little bit better since you've had so much time to prepare. You drafted him all the way back in April. You knew that this was going to be your quarterback, and then you were even trailing by multiple scores in this game, and you still weren't throwing the ball downfield. That gives me concerns because it shows me you just don't trust your quarterback yet, and it's already here. We're in week 1. This was the guy you spent the 3rd overall pick on. What's going on? Check that. The 2nd overall pick, even worse. Again, it was only 1 week. We don't want to overreact, and this would be the week for Terry McLaurin to actually get going at home as a favorite against a Giants defense and a secondary that does not have much talent back there at all. They lost a lot of it this offseason, the big one being their safety McKinney, who went to the Green Bay Packers. So this is what I'm telling you to do. Go ahead, let Terry McLaurin play this week, have a better performance that he had last week when he only had 2 catchable targets, and if he has a decent game at all, sell him. Sell him immediately because this is a gross situation. Now, before we get into this next running back who had over 100 total yards in week 1, but he made this trade away video, 65% of you aren't subscribed to the channel, but I see a lot of you lately are, so I appreciate all the ones that are. Here's your little nudge if you're not yet subscribed. It takes 2 seconds. As I'm doing this, you could have already hit the subscribe button. A gentleman's agreement here on this channel. If you find this video helpful and you got this far into the video, I assume that you do. You hit the subscribe button because it goes a long way, and that's our gentleman's agreement. So hit that subscribe button. Now, that guy who went for over 100 total yards had a great week 1, and it was Ramondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots who had an elite role in week 1. He had an 80% snap share, and he had 64% of the rush attempts. Those 64% of the rush attempts translated to 25 carries to just 7. That's right. Yeah, that's the right number. 7 carries for Antonio Gibson, his backup. This was Ramondre's backfield. Because not only did he see 25 carries, let's look at this right here on Player Profiler. You can see that he also saw 72% of the routes, so he's out there running routes a ton, which is great. That's what we need. We need a 3-down running back. He saw 100% of the carries inside 5 yards, so there's the red zone work, and 77% of the long down and distance, which are those passing down snaps, over Antonio Gibson, which is extremely important. Because Gibson himself is a former college wide receiver / running back, that hybrid player coming off of his best receiving season as a pass-catching running back in the NFL last year. So there were concerns, at least for me and I think some other people, that them signing Antonio Gibson and getting rid of Zeke might mean more competition in the passing game for Ramondre. But as I just showed you, there was not that competition in the passing game. 77% of the long down and distance snaps, and at least for week 1, Ramondre, 72% of the routes run, just 10% for Antonio Gibson. This is a great and potentially elite role for Ramondre Stevenson right now. And just a reminder, last season he stunk, but the whole offense stunk, and Stevenson was battling through injuries and potentially multiple injuries. But in week 1, he looked like himself again, because check this out. Ramondre Stevenson had 120 total yards in that game, and 118 of them came after contact, according to PFF. Now, that 118 yards after contact and his 10 missed tackles forced both led the NFL pretty easily last week, but my one concern would be, why did he have to do it all after contact? Like, the offensive line, we knew coming into the season was going to be one of the worst units in the NFL. Maybe it wasn't the dead last unit in week 1, but it was probably a borderline bottom 5 unit, and that shows based on the fact that Ramondre had to break tackles just to get all his yards. Like, it's good that Ramondre was able to do that, but how consistent is that, and how much will he be able to do that every single week? You can see right here, the Patriots offense after 1 week, 22nd in the NFL. We're not expecting this to be a great offense anytime soon. We're not expecting the offensive line to be above league average. So can Ramondre Stevenson, who put up a massive performance of over 120 yards in week 1, looked great doing it, can he consistently keep breaking these tackles and keep playing with a lead that they weren't expected to have like they did in week 1? I'm a little bit skeptical of that, if I'm being completely honest with you. Now, in this week, he's going to be facing a Seahawks team. He'll be a home underdog, Ramondre, a Seahawks team that only allowed 3.2 yards per carry last week to the Broncos. But I must say, that matchup against the Broncos last week, like, Bo Nix was the quarterback. They weren't scared about the passing game. The Seahawks were able to load the box against guys like Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin, nobody who's really going to scare you at the running back position. So I wouldn't use this as a pure indicator. Like, I think Ramondre Stevenson is better than all those running backs I just named, but he should also see a stacked box because nobody's really going to be scared of Jacoby Brissett, in my opinion. Now, personally, I'm not looking to sell Ramondre Stevenson. Like, I'm fine to hold the guy after that great usage, and we saw saw a great role for him. It's rare to have a 3-down running back in the NFL. He is my 64th overall ranked player, though, right now. So if you could trade him for an Amari Cooper off a down week, I would. If you could somehow swing a deal to get James Conner, I would immediately do that as soon as possible. I would trade him for Chris Godwin. I would trade him for a guy we talked about earlier, in Alvin Kamara, although I think that's kind of just trading a 1-for-1 there. Xavier Worthy is somebody to target if you can. Tank Dell, like we talked about earlier, would be the ultimate get. That'd be a massive upgrade, although I don't know if you'd be able to pull it off. These are guys that I would trade him for if the opportunity presented itself, but he's one of the guys in this video that I'm more so a hold, but if you can get that upgrade, why not? And the next guy I want to talk about is Zach Moss, who led the backfield for the Bengals in week 1 in basically every single situation. It was a great week for Zach Moss. 65% of the snaps ahead of Chase Brown. 56% of the rush attempts compared to just 19 for Chase Brown. The routes run, he saw more routes run. You can scroll a little bit more right here. He sees 100%, which is just one carry inside the 5-yard line. 100% of the 2-minute offense snaps. That was a surprise. 88% of the long down and distance passing snaps. That was a major surprise. Those roles in the 2-minute offense and long down and distance, I was expecting based on last year's usage and the preseason hype for that to be Chase Brown's role in the offense. But it wasn't. It was all Zach Moss. A strong and elite role in week 1 for Zach Moss. He had 9 carries, 2 rush attempts, or 9 carries, 2 catches, and he actually totaled over 60 total yards. The dude was averaging 5.5 yards per touch, scores a touchdown, puts up a respectable 14 fantasy points. So everything looks good for this guy who was efficient in week 1. And you could even argue that it should get better in future weeks when the Bengals offense doesn't struggle like they did in week 1 against the Patriots when they didn't have T. Higgins and didn't have a full go Jamar Chase. There's literally a world where Zach Moss earns even more work than he did in week 1 when he had a solid game of 14 fantasy points instead of 11 total touches. There's weeks where he'll easily see 15 to 16 plus, I'm sure. This was strong usage, but I'm just not buying the week 1 usage. Okay, call me maybe a hater or somebody who's anchoring his bias a little, but I just want to kind of think through this. The Bengals offense looked flat. It looked like they had no explosive plays. Those will come back a little bit when you get T. Higgins and Jamar Chase going full go, I'm sure of it, but in the running game, they had no explosive plays. Zach Moss isn't known to be the guy that's going to get you the 20-plus yard run. That's Chase Brown. That's what he did last year multiple times on a limited sample. Because this Bengals offense looked bad in week 1. I mean bad in week 1. I don't think Joe Burrow's only going to throw for like 150 yards per game and look that bad moving forward. I think the offense will get better, but I think they need some explosive playmakers, and again, Zach Moss isn't that guy. I mean, we know what Zach Moss is at this point. These are his athletic testings. He's a guy who runs a 4.65. Brutal. He doesn't really have any burst. He doesn't really have any agility, maybe a little bit of agility, but in terms of his yards per carry for his career, he's a average runner. He's a 4 yards per carry runner. Some years it'll be 5 yards per carry on a smaller sample, 3.6, 4.3, right? This is a guy who's an average runner, average NFL runner, but below average athlete. And as of right now, he's the clear running back 1. And I don't think that Chase Brown's going to become the running back 1 in week 2, but I do think as the weeks go on, if he can continue to pass protect like they said he was doing in training camp in the practices, I don't see why he's not going to see more touches, especially on those second 2-minute offenses in long down and distance passing situations. You're just going to have to put the better pass catcher, more explosive player on the field eventually. Maybe they didn't want to do it week 1. Maybe they're concerned about this Joe Burrow wrist injury for a couple of more weeks, and then you start to put the younger player outside in Chase Brown out there to protect Joe Burrow instead of the veteran that they probably trust more right now. But like I was saying with Ramondre Stevenson, I'm not dying to go out and trade Zach Moss if I have him, because we did see that good role in week 1 and he put up decent fantasy production in a gross game environment that should only get better for the Bengals moving forward. So I don't think you have to go out and trade him, but if there was a time to upgrade him because you could get somebody who's a little bit better in my rest of season rankings, now would be the time, because he's about to be a 5-point underdog on the road to the Chiefs, who only allowed 49 rushing yards in week 1 to Derrick Henry and the Ravens running backs. So this would be the time to trade him, because in week 2, the spot is sketchy. The production is potentially going to be sketchy. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, he might have 8-7 fantasy points, and that's not great. Because right now, Zach Moss is my 79th overall ranked player, but if he doesn't have a good week 2 and the matchup doesn't set up for that right now, he's going to fall outside, probably closer to my 100th overall player. But right now, maybe you can trade him for somebody like a Calvin Ridley, who didn't have a great week 1, and that Titans offense looked bad, but overall, I feel hopeful. His own teammate, T. Higgins, who didn't play in week 1. If you can get a Brian Thomas Jr., go ahead and do that as soon as possible. These are the players that you should be trading away, in my opinion, just trying to upgrade your team, not because they're bad, but I want you to upgrade your team. That's why I'm here. But if you want to see the guys that you can try and trade these players for, the guys who I think are the must trade for running backs and wide receivers, well, check out these 2 lovely videos. They're going to be popping up right here. YouTube thinks you'll like them. I think you'll like them, and they just might be your favorite video of all time. So check them out, and I'll see you in the next one.